Good afternoon. May I request everybody to settle down? We would like to begin this session. Our subject for this afternoon's discussion is India's priorities for the next 5 years. And in this discussion, we will have four very eminent and personalities and domain experts. Professor Huzur Saran from IIT Delhi, Mr. Ashwini Rana, Chief Public Policy Officer of ZUPI, Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya, Vice Chair of IIGF 2022, and Ms. Mishi Chaudhary, Technology Lawyer and founder of SFLC.in. So, what I'm going to request the four panelists to give a maybe 2 to 3 minute perspective on what they think should be the priority for India from the perspective of internet governance. All of them come with very, very interesting and distinct backgrounds. So I think we might see a little bit of overlap, but what we will definitely see are four very important dimensions being expressed by them. And then I'm going to launch into a conversation with them and as early as possible bring in your thoughts and views on the subject. At a level, it's a very vast subject, but I think it's also important that through this session, we come to some kind of agreement or consensus that amongst the several priorities which may be outlined, which are the ones that we should look at first and how should we approach them. So I think I'm going to begin by requesting Mishi to begin because I can see that she's live and we can see and hear her clearly. And assuming that something might go wrong in the link, I would like Mishi to begin off, start off right away, Mishi. So over to you. If you could take 2 or 3 minutes to tell us what you think in your experience and perspective should be India's priorities. Over to you.
Sounds good to me. I'm going to say a very good morning from 4 a.m. New York to all of you. And as you can see, I'm bright and early and filled with energy. So very, very excited to have to be participating here. When I saw the topic, I thought the good news is that because we are all children of the Republic of India, we know an awful lot about thinking in terms of 5-year plans. That history of a 5-year planning is short list of great ambitions. And I thought I will give you my short list and also my expectations of where our investment in terms of resources and time should go. And I think that a great government is greatly ambitious for its people, never mind the question of how many people are there. So it's right to have ambition. And in this field of technologies of software, where human brains are what it takes, where we don't have to actually mine ore from ground, but we are just allowed to think it up, our ambition should be to be the greatest people on earth. So the four pillars, as the prompt said in what I received in terms of this panel, my first emphasis is for cybersecurity. I do think that cybersecurity must become a national security and economic security imperative, because everybody recognizes that government's responsibility and role to make that happen, where we have people-centric cyber policy, is a necessity now. We've seen that modernizing our cybersecurity defenses and protecting all government network as well as critical infrastructure, as we've seen with what's recently happened with AIMS, is now important. I also think incremental improvements will not give us the security we need. And the government needs to make bold changes and some significant investments in order to defend the vital institutions that underpin Indian life. And to keep pace with the dynamic and increasingly sophisticated cyber threat environment, there need to be some decisive steps to modernize our approach to cybersecurity. So that's going to involve advancing things like zero trust architecture, accelerating the movement to secure cloud services, and centralizing and streamlining access to data security data to drive analytics for identifying and managing those risks. The second thing, which I believe is very important, is to see that to move technology policy beyond content moderation. Understandably, governments are crucially concerned now with content moderation and public discourse. Some of it is high-minded, and some of it is narrow and partisan. But government concern with content control is overwhelmingly common amongst many governments. Perhaps the Europeans, with their emphasis on privacy law, have gone a little past the point where content moderation is not the centerpiece of tech policy. But that also shows, because of the Digital Security Act and Digital Markets Act, that we can't understand how to get out of the clutches of content moderation and thinking of technology policy to always say, who should be saying something on Twitter? What can we take down or from Facebook? If government is actually going to intervene to make technology policy that protects people, we need to put people in the center of all of this. And it must start by asking, what do people need? Not what platforms are providing or not providing. The third pillar I'm going to say is that we are beginning to think of ourselves in terms of economy. An economy moving from extracting data from people and monetizing it as though our job was to become a platform economy itself. That's not our job, because there is some truth in it, but there's a lot of trouble in collecting data and then just monetizing it. And selling the behavior of Indian people is not the business we should be in. We should be in the business of selling the product, which is the Indian mind. That leads me to the fourth pillar, and I'm going to keep it short now, is in the 21st century, the nation with the most data scientists, the people who are trained to understand how to actually use these technologies as well as data for the benefit of humanity, they are the ones who are going to win. Everybody who's right now talking about AI is basically thinking in terms of data scientists. And climbing the value chain makes sense, because when we are the size of India, the value chain, when we climb it, we also become the dominant in the world. This was the point which was very clear to our lawmakers in the very beginning, who established IITs that have given us the ability to lead in global tech now. And that is why it calls upon us to shape curriculum, schooling, and pathways of human development. And one of the ways we can do it is by returning to the historic position in which we attempt to use technology to better the ordinary people's lives and put people at the center. Whether we are making data protection laws or we are making regulations, we need to think about people protection. People would like to use technologies for their convenience, for their ability to be able to talk to their governments, but they don't want to be bothered by vandalism, cybersecurity threats, crime, or forced not to be able to be and express themselves. They would like to go about their businesses while being protected, free from the fear of being monetized by somebody. So we need to do that. And I would say that from my agenda, I would say those are the 4 pillars I would like to see the next 5 years of thinking about in this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishi. I think these 4 points are a great start for all of us. I'm going to request Professor Saran to come in now. We were discussing the first point that you were talking about on cybersecurity, but over to you, Professor, in terms of what would you say are the 3 or 4 big priorities we should look at?
So thanks, Pranjal. And as Mishi already said, cybersecurity is a very big part of it, what needs to be done. So let's step back a minute. So what's happening is India has slowly been digitizing a lot of its public services, and you may say India is going towards digital public infrastructure. That has been what they have been doing with Aadhaar, with Jan Dhan, with so many other things, right? And that is an efficient way of delivering services and capabilities to across the length and breadth of India and address some of the inequalities in our society. So it's a right move, but the challenge is that that clearly makes a dependency on the telecom and internet infrastructure. And I was reading the minister's lecture to your previous IIJF last year, and the emphasis was on a open, safe, and accountable internet. Right? Many people said that. If you look at it today, is the internet open? Well, there is definitely a threat of censorship there, right? For various reasons, right? Of course, certain states are already very censorship oriented. Others are also looking at it. So that keeping it open is one aspect that we need to keep investing in through a multi-stakeholder mechanism, which India is committed to. The other two pillars, safe and accountable. So as Mishi said, safe is something that is a problem for the internet today, right? How to keep it safe is going to take a lot of effort. And I think that is where the focus of our effort should be there. And to keep it safe, we need accountability. Today, for example, just to illustrate, Mishi mentioned the AIIMS attack, right? So about the time AIIMS was attacked, some of the services at IIT Delhi also went down. They went down, they didn't get attacked. Well, they didn't get hacked, but they went down. I called I used to be head of the particular center which does this, but so I called the person there to see what's going on, why are these services down? So he says there seems to be an under significant attack, some kind of attempts to hack us, which is bringing down this service. And what I have done is I have investigated now where the attack is coming from. They're coming from some 3 or 4 countries outside India. And as a temporary measure, I am going to block accesses from those geolocations as a way to get my services up. But what that means is I can't trace that back and ask that country, who the hell is this? Arrest him. We don't have that kind of setup today. You see, if you have people making you calls from foreign countries, you still in the telecom partnership arrangements and the ITU, there are still some protocols where you can enforce some security. In the internet, there is nothing like traceability and accountability. At least even legally, you cannot enforce it between countries. There is no UN mandate. So these are things we need to work towards. Why should not there be traceability and accountability when attacks are being made from your country? And other illegal content, inappropriate content is being, because now it is and I would even say, you know, the telecom infrastructure and the internet infrastructure is merging. When you talk about 5G, it is all a data-oriented network. You talk about 6G, you talk about, Pranjal and I were just discussing that smart metering is happening in a big way. You're going to have massive IoT, which will ride on 6G infrastructure perhaps, right? Or 5G or whatever version of it. So it is all tied together. If you look at our entire digital infrastructure today, it is based on 2FA. And what is the base of that 2FA? It is SMS OTP, which is unencrypted and has its own challenge. You know, recently TRAI passed a guideline that every time you change a SIM, you cannot get SMSs for 24 hours. Why? Because suddenly a scam was discovered. Somebody goes with your identity to a service provider and gets a new SIM for you. You don't even know, right? Because remember, and why I'm bringing that up is not for that particular case, but we have to think of telecom and internet governance not as separate issues. That's one point I want to make. Second is, and all our digital infrastructure is based on notion of digital identity, which as of today is based on your phone number, right? And that was not a conscious decision. It was banks suddenly started having scams with their internet accounts, said, let me add OTP. But they did not think through, if you add OTP, everything is dumped to the telecom provider. How good and how capable does he have? Every shopkeeper which has a telecom Airtel center in Jhunjhunu, where somebody can go and say, Mera SIM kho gaya, give me a new one. I lost my SIM, give me a new one. And how much effort is it needed to make sure that, does he have the capability to validate the identity of every person? Is he like a passport officer? He is not. right? You depend on him. So you've decided to dump your problem to somebody else, but you've not thought the whole big picture. So that's what I'm trying to say, that we need to have a bigger picture, this thing. The second point that was made, and I think I agree with Mishi, that we need to leverage our intellectual capabilities. But we must also appreciate the flood of AI that is happening. What intellectual capabilities will we leverage is a question. Only the other day I was reading, Larry Summers was saying that now with ChatGPT, which is a new AI tool that has just come on, right? It is as powerful as invention of printing press or of the fire or wheel. It's going to have such a radical change. I was reading a school teacher's opinion. He was saying ChatGPT it can generate a better essay than an average student of 12th class in the US, right? So students don't need to learn essay writing because anyway they will never learn it properly, right? So the world is changing very rapidly. So if you're going to only train people to be good Macaulay clerks, it's not needed in today's world. ChatGPT will do that job for you. So the question is, it needs to even ask ourselves, what is the quality of our education? Are you making them thinkers, are making them innovators, creators, or are we making them only whatever form of mechanical or not high intelligence, high creativity people? So that's an aspect that also has to be thought through. It's a bigger issue than just internet, but one can keep going. I will stop here and let other people give their comments and we can go back and forth. That would be more useful.
I think the one key takeaway, Professor, is when you refer to the whole burden coming on telecom infrastructure is also about what you are articulating is multi-stakeholder accountability.
Right.
So it's not just about one entity or one part of our economic and business ecosystem or governance ecosystem, but perhaps everybody has a role to play. So which brings me to, sorry, you want to?
Yeah, no, I just want to add one point, that other than multi-stakeholder, somebody has to look at the big picture. If you're saying banks are going to use phone numbers or Aadhaar is going to use phone numbers, then has somebody thought about how do you make sure that phone numbers are going to be really secure?
True.
Right? Who thought about that? Did you ask somebody to think that through? Right? So that's what I mean.
And I think solutions which were created in a situation of a certain context may not be applicable or relevant when you scale up to a billion people. The OTP solution was probably thought for 200 million people, but with 1 billion people and with the penetration as you're mentioning, it may not work. We'll come back to this thought, but I want to turn to Jaijit here. Jaijit, as an innovator, I know you wear several hats, but as an innovator, as a founder of technology-based solutions, how do you see the priorities from innovation point of view, from an entrepreneur point of view? If you were to set the 3 or 4 top priorities which will enable, accelerate innovation, what would you say?
Right, thank you, Pranjal. If I can paraphrase Spider-Man, with great technology comes great challenges. And we are all here because of the great technologies that have unfurled in front of us. The issues that Mishi talked about, the issues that Professor Hazur Saran talked about. I mean, look at what happened on 23rd of February before Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's really become my favorite example. Before any invasion, they would first do an aerial bombarding. This time, they did a cyber bombardment, and pretty similar to what's happening on AIIMS and in IIT Delhi that Professor Hazur Saran mentioned, and Ukraine could respond. So the point is that there will be a plethora of challenges in multiple dimensions. One of the dimensions obviously is safety and security. There is a dimension of regulation because people will get impacted. So how do we do regulations such that it does not stifle innovation while protecting people? I think an excellent example is the regulation that we have come out on drones. We were one of the first ones to come out with regulations on drone. It has really given a fillip to the entire drone industry. We are now really having an explosion of innovation happening in drones. So could we replicate that in every single aspect of technology? The other part of it is innovation for whom and the roadmap for whom. What are we talking about? Is it innovation for innovation's sake because a few mad people are saying that there is a new generation of technology that could be created, or is it for the people of India? And if it's for the people of India, then what about the auto rickshaw driver? What are we really innovating for that person? Are we helping that person generate more income? And a few regulatory changes really helps in doing that. Or are we using AI to its optimal level for using direct benefit transfer? And with the amount of data that we have collected in the last 20-25 years, the structured data, it is now really possible to unleash AI on this data, chew it up and find out who really needs help and who doesn't need help. And we have done an excellent job in terms of direct benefit transfer. In the next 5 years, can we change the gear and do what ChatGPT has been doing? What ChatGPT does with churning out an essay and making the life of a 12th grader much easier, can we do the same for the poor and the needy and the poorest of poor in this country in terms of direct benefit transfer using AI on the same set of data? And then what about technologies on which we got no control, which is rushing down at us and that we need to respond to? Quantum computing as an example. Either we are on board and we are in the forefront, or we are not there. What is the implication? The entire banking that we are doing will go for physics. The encrypted text that Professor Saran was talking about. Now imagine all your passwords in banking become meaningless. The whole debate over 128-bit encryption and 256-bit encryption that we went through, where different departments had different views, all becomes past and history and silly conversations in the face of quantum computing. So how do we now transform the financial services? And for sure we know quantum computing is knocking on the door. It's just a matter of a year at max when it will be commercially available for actually doing the kind of things that we don't want them to do, because clearly technology will be used when the benefits coming out of the technology will be higher than the cost of technology. Quantum computing will be expensive at the hands of nations who wants to wreak havoc against their adversaries. Quantum computing will be an extremely potent tool to have, and therefore we need to keep an eye on just not quantum computing but the whole range of technologies that are coming in. Metaverse is another example. Is it going to be harmful? No, but it's going to be harmful in a very different way. Metaverse will be transformational for, let's say, education. Now in the most rural of areas, the children can sit in the best of classrooms thanks to Metaverse and get the best of education. But if they don't have the access devices, if they don't have the relevant devices, they'll be deprived. So we deprive them of connectivity, of digital, of education, of therefore ability to earn an income, and they become those who become a pariah in the society. And that is what becomes dangerous, that we need to be working towards. So we must make sure that we have the plethora of tools needed to have technology work for the entire society and not just for the few who have access to it. And along with it comes the issues of copyrights, copyrights on things that we are good at, as India is good at. We have got Bollywood, we've got music, we've got art. With the advent of technology, and now with AI and the foundation AI, which is what really pushes ChatGPT and other such technologies, what happens to our major industries? What happens to our Bollywood, our music, and the people who are working behind it? What happens to their jobs? Very quickly we see that their jobs will not be needed anymore. Now I make presentations, I don't go to Google and search for pictures anymore. I go to this ChatGPT and the OpenAI and just say I need this kind of a picture. It generates a picture, it's copyright free, I pick it up and I'm done. So I think one can go on and on what is the implication of what we see in the next 5 years. And it reminds me of the term that I had created about 15-16 years back, which is technological sovereignty. We need to have technological sovereignty in every aspect that we operate in. I think that's what we need to really look for in the next 5 years.
Jayjit, I'm glad you mentioned tech sovereignty, because if you had not, I would have raised that issue with you, because I know this is absolutely a critical part of what we have to get ahead with. But you know, on technology, to say that technology can be dangerous, my perspective is that no technology per se is dangerous. It's how you prepare for it. I mean, you know, football is not dangerous, but if you play it in the middle of a traffic, it is dangerous. If you play it in a very well played in a proper place, soccer field with the rules, then of course
Gone off.
it's absolutely fine.
Right now. Okay.
Okay. So one clear priority is to have foolproof systems when we are discussing
If I may
issues of
add with your
future.
permission, and that's what my example with metaverse is, that it's not a dangerous technology.
True.
It becomes dangerous when we are creating a divide in the society because we are not responding to it properly.
No, see, I think we have to prepare. I think the key issue is, do we understand, do we absorb, and then therefore we prepare for it, or we just hurtling down a road without adequate preparation. I'm going to come back to some of these issues, but Ashwini, if I can bring you in, you are in a sector which is perhaps as regulated or as questioned as crypto is. But from your perspective, as a company which is on the cutting edge of a new sector, how do you see as the priorities for internet governance in India?
I would like to start from when I saying priority, I look at from what really is India's priority. So as of now, I think there are two levers. Apparently, one is manufacturing, all across sectors. Manufacturing is something where lots of hopes of present and future India are hinging on. So starting from mobile phones to defense and space sectors also, I'll say participate in public and private partnership is flowering there as well. So this is opening new avenues for manufacturing in India. Another area is around environment and clean energy, which is also we are seeing electrical vehicles also slowly manufacturing starting up in India, which also is going to enable startup ecosystem getting plugged into manufacturing. Second big lever for India looks like, which is priority will be decided, is internet based services and products. Especially after 5G, speed of connectivity has improved with low latency. That's going to be, I'll say, fodder for some new kind of services. Those were imagined earlier, but there was not technology available to deliver that. And there may be many services or products, those were not even imagined. So I am seeing that coming 5 years would be something which we haven't seen or imagined so far will be in front of us as product and service. Startup is something which is horizontally going to affect manufacturing as well as internet based product and services sector. Luckily, India is at a sweet point where geopolitical situation or aspirations of country are matching, and we are doing great on manufacturing, or at least promise is very high, and equally good at internet based services and products. Startup ecosystem is growing. All of us know that more than 100 unicorns and thousands of sonicorns already in place. Enabling factor would be also a regulatory approach. So far, India's approach has been always defensive. In my personal opinion, there may be also, it may be a bit controversial to many people, but in my opinion, our approach, I have been in this sector for more than 25 years, earlier with telecom and then with social media. So I have seen that generally our approach is defensive. We don't want to take bold initiatives, promote innovation, a fear that something may go wrong, users may get affected, national security may come under threat. These are the, this approach need to be changed if we want to go global, if we think that we have a mission to go global and become a developed nation, which we keep hearing our politicians and leaders tell, and we also aspire to, or at least we are in a position where we can at least dream about it. So I think this approach needs to be changed. We need to be more welcoming for being bold, taking risks. That's, I think, something which I would like to this country move towards, where we are not as of now.
Thank you. You know, this is a very interesting word which you use, bold, and I'm going to maybe ask some of you in the audience to come back and tell me what you think and how do you interpret bold. If India had been very bold and made cryptocurrencies completely open, legal, and allowed everybody to trade from it, and a few 100 million people lost a few billion rupees, where would we be? The same bunch of people would come back and say that who decided what was good? Were we ready to allow people who are not perhaps as adequately digitally literate to be able to trade in cryptocurrency, even in a time when we still see scams on every other financial tool possible? So the question that we are talking about effectively is that when we talk about internet governance and the rules, who's going to set the rules and when? If you say the government should do it, then the bunch of people will say, well, government is going to capture everything and convert us into some kind of a fascist country. And if you allow the private sector to do it, then you'll say, well, the tech global giants control us, they are above sovereign nations, no rules apply to them. And we see that happening anyway, because countries across the world are struggling to contain the power of global technology giants, and the number are increasing. So this is therefore the question for us in terms of the priority, and I'll request all of you to weigh in on this, because when we look at issues of safe and accountable, open and accountable, Professor Saran, there is a fundamental contradiction in that. How do you find the balance? And then I'm going to request Mishi to come on this as well.
No, you have hit a point, and the issue is, who do we trust, right? As you say we'll give power to governments, but then governments will misuse it. So we don't trust government too much, right? We give power to companies, Google or whatever, name your favorite company. Twitter is very popular nowadays, right? And the Twitter owner, right? New owner. So the question is, who do we trust? And the short answer is, in the end, we don't want to trust any one person, right? We want to have a competition.
Okay, can I ask you something? Can we trust the academia?
You see, let me put it another way. If you put pressure at a point, that point gets bent. If you put too much trust in any one person, he will be forced by so many stakeholders, pushed in every direction, and somebody will find a way to push him. True. Right? There will be weakness. Somewhere there will be weakness, and somebody will find the weakness. So it's better to have a distributed kind of trust where you trust not one person. After all, in India, we are so popular, we do committees all the time. Why do we do it? Because we don't trust any one person.
But you're also looking for collective wisdom.
So that's what exactly. So what I'm trying to say is, you have to make it multi-stakeholder, so that any one stakeholder steps out of line, the others can push him back in line. I think that is the mechanism. Even our parliamentary democracy, everything is designed that you do not give too much power in one hand. You try to balance it off, and then that keeps everybody, most of the people at least, most of the time, remain honest, and then things work, right? So I think that is the same kind of governance framework, suitably designed and suitably thought through, we need to have in this scenario.
Mishi, your thoughts?
So I'm going to say that I think we have to also recognize the reality of what today's situation is. We don't live in an authoritarian nation like our neighbors, where, of course, it's much easier to decide on something and then just force everybody to follow it, whether it is 3 years of fantastic, nonsensical COVID policy or whatever they would like to decide tomorrow. The consultation about several things has to be multi-stakeholder. I think internet governance has been saying it for a very long time, precisely because today every individual person can also actually be a service provider on the net, because that completely changes the dynamics. So that person also has some stake. I will, however, also say that even in our current system, where sometimes the pre-consultation for policies are followed and sometimes they're not followed. Committees are there, but most of the committees' recommendations are still lying in the various drawers the report was actually left in. What we have also seen, when governments and large platform companies collide, users are the biggest losers. I have written for a very long time in public to say sometimes, oh, the Twitter people are not responding to what Government of India is asking. Nobody asks the users. We are asked to watch from the sideline when the government has gotten what it wants, when the business has decided what it can give. So the reality out here is we are being told that you users are only good to give us your data, and the government says, trust us because we are the government. You see the draft of the data protection bill. There is not even a single mention of surveillance or the harm or the rights given to an individual. That just tells us that we are actually not respecting an individual, despite the fact that there is a multi-stakeholder forum which is recognized in the entire world. That is why we see such a lot of discussion. The recognition is India is a leader. A lot of people, many countries in the continent of Africa, in Southeast Asia, when they understand that our reality is not going to look like the American reality or the European Union's reality, they look towards India. They also know that we are not China, we are not Russia, we are not Iran, despite the fact that the government wants to say that we want to follow those policies. But people look, the world looks at India as an actual intellectual leader in the world. We must fulfill that responsibility and also appreciate we cannot live in a silo. So what policies you will make today, a journalist from NPR is going to be commenting on it 2 hours later. Because of internet, every discussion now does become global as well. So there are no easy answers. So if you were going to say I can find or recommend a path of golden mean, we do it a balancing act of some kind or the other, there aren't easy answers. Cybersecurity, there's an easy answer. However, I think the government must recognize as well that citizens have a voice, and that voice has to be equal to the various stakeholders. Businesses have to recognize that surveillance and only monetizing our data is not something which anybody is going to buy anymore. And the users have to protect themselves also, because we can't just wait for various mechanisms to come. So we also have to learn to protect ourselves and secure ourselves. And that's why my organization does all of these things, works with the legislature, works with the executive, but also trains individuals to protect themselves online. So I would say I don't have an easy answer. These are thorny, hairy topics for which all stakeholders must come together. And when smart people come together, perhaps we would come up with some good ideas.
You know, this is a great point. Today, when you talk about India, every policy of India being discussed globally, why is that? You know, maybe we should step back and think about this one sentence. India is the world's largest free market democracy. It is also growing at a tremendous pace, perhaps amongst the top rates in the world. For all global companies, this is the real market to be in. Other markets are declining or saturating. Therefore, they all want to have a say in what India is doing. So while we say that yes, the discussions are global, it's also because there is a self-interest in many of the global organizations to influence, if not decide, what India is doing. So therefore, I think there is a responsibility on India and the governance structure of India to keep its own interest in mind. And therefore, Jaijit, I'm going to come to you because you're also you also head the CDEP, the Center for Developing Economies, where you're looking at technology and democracy. So I'm coming back to the question that who is going to decide the interest for India?
So let me take a few examples from the conversation we have had till now on this platform. We talked about the European laws on privacy. Let's take GDPR for an example, right? And it's tom-tommed as the draft to look at for privacy. Why did Europe go for such a law? Why are they so interested in everything digital? But I don't see too much of a protest coming when it comes to, let's say, carcinogenic baby powder, right? It's when Europe starts losing out in manufacturing, it comes out with ISO 9000, right? Government comes out with it, not multi-stakeholders in Europe. Government comes out with ISO 9000, says everybody must fill up tomes and tomes of paper, and only then you will be allowed to import into Europe or export into Europe, whichever the case may be. And those papers don't really need to lead to much, right? And you also have to pay a substantial amount to an organization based out of Netherlands to be able to get that precious certificate of ISO 9000. We see that Europe was losing out in digital, continues to lose out in digital. There's no big tech out of Europe. None of the big tech is out of Europe. And therefore, we see all the big techs getting multi-billion-dollar fines in Europe. We see regulations such as GDPR, which will be very detrimental for startups in India, but it doesn't matter to Europe. They have the ability to use those legislations to actually degrade the digital tech companies that are operating out of Europe. So there and innovation, right? And therefore, there is a national narrative behind those legislations. They look very nice. They are having human rights right in the front. Humans must be protected. Their rights must be protected. It reminds me of Arjuna fighting behind Shikhandi. These are regulations created where the core objective is something else. And therefore, to your question, we must look and find out what is needed for us as a nation. Our strategic objective is not the same as Europe's strategic objective. We can work together. We also were not in the forefront of digital, just like Europe. We are beginning to make the baby steps now. We're just at the beginning where we are clawing. We have some nice gaming companies like the gentleman on the right from Zupi or Winzo and so on and so forth. We have all these companies who are now doing the new generation of exports. For thousands of years, we have been exporting goods. Then we started exporting people, the body shopping. Then we had services being exported. Now we've got streaming services being exported, where people can log in, play games, or they can log in and watch Bollywood movies. Those are next generation of exports happening. We need to have a structured approach to that. We need to have a structured government to respond to it. Let me take some other examples in terms of narration. Is there multi-stakeholders who decide what should be printed by Washington Post or New York Times? There is their editor, there is a journalist, the two of them decide in the print, right? And that defines a significant portion of our narration. Of course, multi-stakeholderism is important. Of course, democracy is important. But let's just even question democracy for a moment. Who funds it? We have not solved that problem. It looks very nice, right? And the moment we go into the bottom of it as to who funds it, then there are issues that starts coming up, right? Similarly, in multi-stakeholderism, who funds it? Who are the multi-stakeholders? Who has the time to be there? If you're not there and you're busy, running, teaching in the institutions or doing a job in a company, coding and so on and so forth, you really need to stretch, right? And there are great people who do that job for us, but it's not everybody. It's a set of people. Are we okay to let them lead or talk for us? We know that millions of people in India got deprived of credit because we did not allow Aadhaar to be used to provide credit, because of the concerns of privacy, which was not endemic to India. Our priorities were different. Our priorities was to ensure that our society gets strengthened, credit goes to the last person standing, they are able to grow, and Aadhaar would have played a significant role in doing that. So things can't be in black and white. Different issues require different institutions to come in front. Multi-stakeholderism is an important institution that is getting created, and we must support it. But we must keep in mind that for certain aspects, there are existing institutions which are better placed.
Thank you, Jayjit. I think that's very passionately said. I'm going to use a phrase to summarize what you said. Is it also that India is being forced to look at standards of a developed economy at a time when it's not yet a developed economy? Is it fair to ask for standards and regulations that an evolved, mature company has and apply the same to a startup? Do we do that? So therefore, the distinction between standards and status has to be made. Do you have the same rules of responsibility for an adult and a child? So I think those are very, very interesting questions which I know that people in the government and the private sector are looking at. And therefore, Ashwini, I'd like to come to you on your comment, and then after that bring some thoughts from the audience as well.
Thank you. I'd say most of the businesses, those are internet based. That's like a highway or super highway. So some of the rules will be same. So if you are there, you have to maintain speed limits, etc. But there may be different lanes for different type of vehicles. So I'm saying both possibilities exist. There may be a large set of rules, those will be common for all, considering nature of internet is monolithic, across border it runs. But at the same time, there may be different set of rules applicable to different entities based on the kind of or nature of business they are in. For example, social media is a different animal than a startup which is doing gaming for example. So different set of rules may be applicable for both of them, or maybe there may be some businesses, those are people are doing B2B transactions on internet, that may not be similar to what people are doing on social media. So different rules can be there, but also broadly considering internet as a monolithic, when government intervention happens, that has potential to break this monolithic nature of internet. But again, I'll say this is not final word. China has proved that breaking internet can also be beneficial for a country. They have proved it, I'm saying. Now that model is also on the table. Is it suitable for India to go for that kind of model, considering some similarities with China? Our market is, I'll say, next to China in size, number of people. So some arguments may be there that, okay, if China can do it, we can also do it. We can also create our national champions because of those restrictions. But does it fits well in our overall scheme of things, considering we are a democratic society unlike China? Our linkages with Europe and US and other liberal democracies, that's also something we cannot ignore, or rather we love that part of the equation. So I'm saying there may be a balance of both.
Thank you. Any thoughts and questions from the audience, please? I know a lot of people know you, ma'am, but please do introduce yourself for those who are watching us live.
Thank you so.
It's on. We can
Thank
hear
you so much. My name is Amrita Chaudhary. Just a few comments, as in, I firmly believe that privacy is important. Individual privacy is also important, especially when products are being designed by companies, or even government has to look at it, because trust comes from that. If I don't trust the internet or any service, I would not be using it. Now, going to when regulations are formed and taking a point from what Mr. Saran said, looking at the bigger picture, I think when regulations are being drafted or plans are being made, the unintended harm of what we are trying to implement needs to be looked at. So perhaps at the first stage, a self-governance kind of a model may work. Try it, test it, and then come alive. And coming to the point which you made on standardization, I think it's very important that Indians, rather than talking, participate in the standard-making bodies, the technical standards like IETF or the others which Anupam and team are involved in, because if you are there in the table, you can change the rules, else you cannot change the rules. Thank you so much.
That's a great point. Anupam, and then there's a gentleman at the back. Please go ahead.
Hi. Hi, this is Anupam from TCS. So on the standards, it is very important that we sit on the high table. Jayjeet mentioned about ISO 9000 being having a bunch of papers to work upon and getting certified by a company in Netherlands. This is a fact, okay. But it could have been adopted to suit the Indian use case. That is where we have missed the bus. We have adopted ISO 9000 as it is, the way it was made by the bunch of people in Europe. We have not taken an effort to modify it to suit the Indian use case. Similarly, there are standards on resilience, there are standards on security of internet. We need to make sure that it gets adapted to the use case on which we are going to apply the standards. So, and the best part is that standards will ensure resiliency. If we don't follow standards, we will not be able to ensure resiliency in the entire ecosystem. Thank you.
Fair point. The gentleman behind you, and there's a gentleman there. Sir, I'll just come to you in a second after these two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Harish Chaudhary from National Forensic Science University. There is a question on, is there any institutional framework in India to support internet governance?
Okay, very specific question. One question from the gentleman, and I'll come to the panel for a collective response.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
So my question goes to Ms. Mishi and the rest of the esteemed panelists.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm sorry. I'm Abhishek and I'm from the Center for Digital Economic Policy Research. There was a lot of discussion on the topic of cybersecurity. And as I understand, it encompasses two domains, digital security and protection of physical assets. So in the area of digital security, we already see India making a lot of waves when it comes to digital public infrastructure and a lot of countries commending India for the progress that it has made. But when it comes to physical assets, I think aspects of trusted value chains and all are more trickier aspects to regulate and oversee. So going ahead, when we talk about regulating or developing the cybersecurity domain in India, how do we balance this mismatch between digital security and protection of physical assets?
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Ramachandran, a quick question from you, then I'd like to come to the panel and then come back to everybody for a second round. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was fascinated by one point that Professor Saran made. He made very good points, many, but particular point was we are putting too much responsibility on telecom for authentication, identification, etc. It doesn't really stop with that. It goes beyond that. But this point he made was very right. So I have a question based on that. Being a telecom man, I was present at the first meeting that Mr. Nandan Nilekani took with DOT. I was in that meeting when he came to explore, he and Dr. Sharma came to explore the possibility of what can be used for identification. And in fact, at that time we all made discussions, presentations to him. He was very seriously interested in mobile. But after hearing everything, very consciously at that time he decided against it. He went away. And other developments in Aadhaar followed. So, sir, you are right in a way. But that's also today we don't have any other way in India. So what is the solution? And number two, here in India, we have achieved a lot due to mobile telecom. This country has got where it is today in telecommunication because of mobile. And therefore, a preponderance of burden comes on the mobile for many things, whether it is AGR, crucifying the industry with AGR or with authentication. But we don't really have a solution. So how do we tackle this? This is a very real problem that you have said.
Sure. Mr. Jain, quickly I'll take your point and then come to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just want to answer a question from attendee here, Harish. He asked whether there is an institutional mechanism of internet governance in India. Yes, Harish, we have a internet governance unit under Ministry of Electronic and IT. And yes, there is a unit, but that is a that unit prepare the policies for internet governance in the country, but they take inputs from various other groups, including Department of Telecom. So it is working well at present. So this is one. And second, I want to react to Mini Chaudhary's comment, which when she was speaking last time, that there are several consultancies, there are several groups which are formed by the government and other organizations, but whether when the formulation of the policies are concerned, the people who are formulating the policy, they may consult those or they may not. Madam, I don't agree with you because I am from the government, so I have spent my 42 years in government, and recently whatever is happening in telecom or in IT, we are following a multi-stakeholder concept where we are consulting, we are issuing the consultation paper, and believe me that all the suggestions which we receive from various stakeholders, we take into consideration. Yes, it may happen sometime that there are suggestions which are conflicting to each other. In that case, the policymakers has to take decisions what to do and what not to do. So this is just, I'll give you the inside view of how the policies are made. And third comment I want to make about what Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya has said. Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, I understand that yes, how the policies are framed and how policies are formed, but let me inform you very clearly that Government of India has taken a stand that we will go with the multi-stakeholder concept in internet governance, and that is what we are not only following, but we are propagating also. Whenever we go to ICANN, whenever we go to IGF, India is the voice which people listen, and it is not only the voice, that is what I am saying, we are practicing. And today, when we are sitting here at India Internet Governance Forum, you must have seen that this forum is a multi-stakeholderism forum where the government representative, industry representative, you are there with us in the coordination from the industry, civil society representation. We have Anupam who is representing the technical firm. So we are, in true sense, are following that. These are only comments, no question from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jain. Professor Saran and then Mishi.
Yeah. So, first, Mr. Ramachandran, you said that yes, you are right that as of today, the most convenient, you see, you could do other kinds of 2FA mechanisms, digital tokens, but doing that is a huge cost. So, 1 billion people have to be issued some kind of authenticator tools, and then maintaining them, and then you'll have to buy it from third party country anyway. So, as of today, probably the most convenient mechanism is the telecom infrastructure, but then that should also be recognized that you are really depending on your, just like yesterday Department of Postman was something that was used for verifying your even your passport verification your postman used to do. So he was playing that role, and it was recognized he is playing that role, and so he had to have certain qualifications, and whatever cost is there, then the cost also has to be somewhere borne. Who bears is not my responsibility. But if you recognize that telecom is playing that role of an identity provider for the whole country, right? The person who's issuing you your SIM is playing that role, then that should be legally and legitimately recognized and thought through, right? That what he should be doing, not some ad hoc mechanism keeps him for 24 hours silent. Is that a solution? I don't, sorry, it is not my intent to comment on government policy, but what is 24 hours? Somebody says he's gone for 3 days abroad and suddenly the problem doesn't get solved. How does 24 hours solve that problem? It's only a very interim solution. So we should go back and ask yourself, if that is our design, solution design, that identity, source of identity is going to be telecom phone number, then how do we make it totally secure? Let's go and ask that question and do it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Mishi, your thoughts?
I don't know the question, but I'm very grateful actually that if Sir, who says that the pre-consultative policy is strictly adhered to, and comments which are received by various stakeholders are consulted. I think that's an excellent thing if it's being done. I think as the great way would be to bring in more transparency in that process so that we all are also aware of what's going on here. He informed me today, which is great, and I'm very delighted to hear that kind of response. I also think that perhaps if that's already happening, there needs to be exploration of more ways of participation of civil society, because they are the people and the various other people. Jajit said not everybody has the time, but there are people professionally dedicated to this work, and they should be allowed to do that. I think the question mostly was about digital infrastructure and the cybersecurity. I think a gentleman asked that question to me. My view right now is that I am much more, as an Indian, concerned with our critical infrastructure. When I sit in the United States and I see how much investment is going on in order to recognize that during any major cyber incident, there are lessons learned, and that cybersecurity is now ensuring, whether it is an executive order coming from the Biden administration, several of which is ensuring that there is zero trust architecture, that the government is very clear about cyber incidents, and there is cooperation between the private sector, the information mechanism to inform the public and the government, then I want to see, because India obviously has much more capability and capacity, the same kind of investment in that security. I am not talking about in the name of safety. There are a lot of policies. That's not what I'm talking about. And when you said the physical infrastructure, so there is obviously, whether you talk about electricity, whether you talk about data, when we talk about data, we are not talking about that there needs to be 13 feet walls to protect any cloud, any data which sits in the cloud. What we're actually talking about is ensuring security of cloud-based architecture. That will involve physical infrastructure. Data centers are physical, and that does involve that. But I don't know if the question was about the fact that there is a lot of offline stuff which happens about which there isn't much discussion. I agree with that. Even the current data protection bill now says digital data. I think there's a lot of other stuff which is going on, and it does need that kind of an attention. So I can only agree in answer to that question.
One question which I would like to specifically put to you, Mishi, is about European context or a developed country context being imposed on a developing country situation. And an example of that is deciding everything from the lens of privacy rather than from the lens of financial inclusion, social development, ensuring that micro entrepreneurs, are also encouraged, that innovation at the grassroots level is encouraged. So do you feel that India should adopt the global standards at a time when we are not ready for them?
So this is a great question, but it does have multiple answers right now. I think it is wrong to say that India is adopting some foreign norms and sets for privacy. It's just because that's not what India is doing.
No, it's about primacy. Sorry, just to rephrase what I was saying, it's not, nobody's arguing against privacy, but deciding privacy is the deciding factor, or there are other elements which need to be balanced with the absolute need for privacy, which a developed country perhaps puts as their #1 priority, but may not be relevant for India.
That's a great question. And I think what you're rightly pointing it out is that India, the way our conditions are, the way our requirements of our population are, obviously will only look at what is our requirement. That we must do and we should do, absolutely. The second point I'm going to make is it is incorrect to say that India is adopting some Western lens for privacy. India is adopting its own constitutional lens about it. The problem happens is we are being told that in name of, you name it, financial inclusion, digital infrastructure, we are all supposed to be completely give up privacy at all, never talk about data protection, just trust the private sector or the government sector to say everything would be hunky-dory. There are so many now data breaches that they don't even make headlines these days. You and I both know in India how our data is treated. So I think we have Indian standards. We are not asking to adopt US standards or European standards, but to say that Indians don't respect privacy or Indians don't require it, it's just different. It's incorrect to say Indians do require. India's conditions are different and we must operate here. But to say Indians don't respect it at all, we have different forms of respect. We all shut the bathroom door when we go to the bathroom. There's nothing, and it's not about that people have anything to hide. It is the other person's judgment about it or conclusion which people have a problem. So my view right now is, to Jajit's point, when Europe comes up with legislation, Europe only has regulation. Europe does not have companies. It is absolutely correct. But Europe does have something which is an understanding about respect for people's rights. I am never going to be in favor that we put civil liberties and rights on the side, and then we only talk about these things on the separate side. If you see White House's executive order on cybersecurity, there are two major things Biden administration has done. all of it talks about civil liberties and privacy. The last point I will make is when we adopted the Constitution, because I am a nationalist in that sense, and we became Republic of India. We became an aspirational country. We gave the right to vote to everybody when American women did not have right to vote that time. So we are an aspirational country. We are the largest democracy. So we can set higher standards. Why are we being asked to say that we cannot aspire to that higher standard? Because we have the intellectual capability, we have the right constitutional minds, and I believe our government is also committed to making our people's lives better. So I personally think that it's not about asking for a lens of another country. Our standards right now have to be higher than those.
Thank you. Thanks, Mishi. We have 5 minutes left. I'm going to request Jayajit to respond and a quick intervention from Ashwini too.
Yeah, I think a bunch of clarifications. First, to Mishi's point that Europe is people focused, which is great. We are not challenging that. We are challenging Europe's legislations, and therefore us copying that. Clearly, ISO 9000 Anupam is a process regulation and not a technology regulation, and was the first non-tariff trade barrier in economic times. In the terms of economics, it's a non-tariff trade barrier. And so using people as an excuse is what the concern is. So it's absolutely great to have people focused. We also must and have the same focus. We are also very people focused. But using that to create regulations which are not aligned to our strategic requirements, that is the point. We need to create regulations which are for us, for our strategic requirements. I think the other point that I just also want to clarify, Mr. Jain is not here, is that unequivocally I'm saying that internet governance has to be driven by multi-stakeholderism. I think the point is that multi-stakeholderism is one mechanism, but issues like what you mentioned, Pranjal, such as crypto and so on, require different kind of interventions. If you go back to 1950s and just 2 years after independence, India was sitting on 500 million pounds. And at that time, we had not decided whether we are socialist or capitalist and so on. And government said, please go ahead and private sector, please go ahead and use the foreign exchange if you need to. Within the next 3 months, the foreign exchange was empty. All capital goods were imported, all machinery was imported. And that was the first financial crisis that India had right after independence. So 1991 was not the first one, it was the third one, by the way. And it happened because of the way we look at governance. Coming to privacy, in fact, I did my entire PhD for 5 years in privacy with Professor Hazur Saran giving me a lot of guidance and hand-holding in those days. Eating, breathing, living, sleeping, only privacy. And one of the friends I ended up having was a gentleman called Richard Stallman, who was supposed to be who is the father of open source technologies. And I coined a term for him, privacy fundamentalist. He would not go onto any highway in US because he thought he was being tracked if he goes through the toll of the US highways, and therefore he would not touch it. The point is to contextualize. And that's what I think, Pranjal, you were also mentioning, is to contextualize privacy, contextualize all these concepts in our framework. There is a significant difference between other lenses and our lenses. Our priorities are slightly different, and that's what we need to continue to focus on.
Thank you. A quick one from Ashwini, then we have to close the session.
Nothing more to add, just what Dr. Jayajit said. We have to look at, I'll say, Europe provides us a good lens to see the contrast. So startup ecosystem did not evolve in the Europe in recent times. It was in the US and now China and India now. So keeping that lens will be, I'll say, right thing to do. Privacy is important, no doubt about it. And I think we have a solution for that. For example, multi-stakeholder is something India has committed for that. We should give, I'll say, put the due where it is due. So we should appreciate that part on India as well, that we are part of multi-stakeholder arrangement for internet governance, which is the right thing. So I think we are at sweet spot as of now, where internet governance, we are at the right place. Startup ecosystem is evolving, policies are being made with India focus. So I think that's the way forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and please now join me in thanking the panelists for sharing their time and views.
Thank you.